Hey, what's up, guys? It's MJW006 here for part 3 of my low stakes heads up sit and go series. Um, Video 3 is the last part of this series and it's titled Breaking Out of the Low Stakes as we move into the $20 games this evening. Um, Basically, with this last PowerPoint tonight, no, I didn't just want to go over the $20 games and, really just do an overview of the low stakes. I wanted to go over a couple of general things as well. A couple of little things that you're going to encounter playing heads up, sit and goes in general. And they're particularly important as you start to move out of the low stakes into the mid stakes. And just a couple of little mental aspects that I thought I'd tack into the PowerPoint tonight. So we'll get going. Once again, we're going to go straight back to our focus points that have been broadcast throughout the series, obviously. And you're probably getting sick of them now, but really, the basics that we want to take from this series in general, particularly from the sweat sessions, reading board textures well, hand reading from them board textures, and obviously our opponent's actions, value betting and taking value optimal lines, and inducing our opponent to make plays that we want them to make. So that's really what I want you guys to take from this series and to be able to nail down really well in your games, and to be able to do that really effectively. So hopefully we've covered that throughout the series, and we're going to try to hit that a little bit more in our games tonight, and talk a little bit more, hopefully, about the value betting and taking value optimal lines element of them four things. Okay, so when we move up to the $20 level from the $10 level, we're going to find that there's more regs. When you start moving up to the $20 level, you're going to start finding that there's people who actually grind these regularly, as opposed to the 5s and 10s where a lot of it's recreational. A lot of people just, playing them for a bit of fun. When you start getting to the $20 level, even though it's still only the, $20, people are actually starting to grind these a little bit more seriously. In general, you're going to find the aggression factor, the knowledge of your average opponent, is evidently going to increase. I think the aggression from the 10s to the 20s, besides, there's going to be maniacs and there's going to be weak passive players at all levels. Okay, so even playing a $200 game, I come across people who are just crazy, super retardedly aggressive, and I also come across people who are, really weak tight. So this is going to happen throughout all the levels because fish are going to be fish no matter what level you're actually playing at. But when I talk about the average player, you're going to come across players who aren't necessarily fish, but they're not really regs, but, they have a decent amount of knowledge. So a lot of the time in heads up sit and goes, these players are players who play other formats of the game and are dabbling in heads up sit and goes. So like MTTers, some cash game players will dabble a little bit in heads up sit and goes. And typically, this isn't so much at the $20 level, but as you move up, these villains are going to have a little bit more aggression, a little bit more general knowledge. It will happen at the $20 level, sorry. Not so much with the cash, but MTT players at the $20 level are probably the most common player that will come across and grind out some heads up sit and goes with that kind of average knowledge. Okay. So you're going to come across a lot more of them at the $20 level than you did at the lower stakes. And also, a higher percentage of our opponents are going to be thinking on level 2. So they're going to be thinking about what you actually have and your possible holdings, and potentially what your actual range is as well. Okay, so therefore we're going to have to think one level ahead more often than we did in the lower stakes. So we're going to have to start thinking not only about what our own holding is and what our opponent's range is, but what our opponent thinks our range is as well. And we're going to have to do that more often. As I said before, fish will be fish at all levels, so I'm not necessarily saying that, all the villains at the $20 level are going to be on level 2. Because you're still going to have a lot of players on level 1, you're going to have players on level 3, okay? This is going to happen, but a high percentage in comparison to the last couple of weeks are going to be thinking about what you actually have more often. So this is something that a lot of people have kind of asked me around the place in terms of taking shots. And now we're getting to a point when we get to the $20 level where you're starting to push towards the mid stakes, and you know, starting to move up. So you're really starting to push forward. Taking shots is an important thing, whether you're playing cash games, MTTs, heads up, sit and goes. No matter what form of poker you're playing, taking shots is important, and doing it well is even more important. So what I like to tell people basically when they ask me about taking shots at new levels is that you probably should have 20 buy-ins for your new level in heads up, sit and goes, and take a 5 buy-in shot. So at your old level, you're still going to have 30 buy-ins at the lower level, even if your shot fails. For example, let's say that we're moving from the $10 level to the $20 level. We take a shot at the 20s when we have, say, $400 in our bankroll. We take a 5 buy-in shot, which is $100. If we lose them 5 buy-ins, then we're down to $300, which is 30 buy-ins at the $10 level, in which case we should move back down, build our roll back up to $400, and we go again, okay? So we rinse and repeat this until we get a good grasp on the 20s, until we can effectively move up. I think this is a pretty good strategy in moving up through all the levels, really, until you get to a point where, you know, you want to start playing a little bit more seriously, where you're going to have to start holding a little bit more in your bankroll, for example. One thing I think a lot of people fail to recognize is once you take a shot, you shouldn't be afraid to move back down if you're not comfortable with the new level for starters, or if it's not going well. I think a lot of people overlook this because they, you know, just because you set aside 5 buy-ins at your new level, and you start playing the $20 level, for example, in our previous example, if you burn through 2 buy-ins and you just feel uncomfortable with it, don't be afraid to move back down and then take your shot when you do feel more comfortable. Just because you say in your mind or whatever you actually say that you're going to take a 5 buy-in shot and you get yourself all psyched up for it, it doesn't mean that you actually can't, you know, move back down before you're actually done with them 5 buy-ins. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is you're having a look at the new level, you're seeing if you can beat the new level. These are the amount of buy-ins that you're prepared to lose if it goes wrong. But jumping out of it halfway through it, if you don't feel comfortable, there's no shame in that whatsoever. Conversely, you know, a lot of people will take that 5 buy-in shot and then, you know, tilt off another 5 buy-ins because they actually felt like they had an edge, but it just didn't go well for them. And it's going to happen. You know, you're going to move up at times and you're going to run terribly. I know a lot of people who have taken shots at the next level up. It's gone horribly for them, but they keep pushing it. You know, they're only running, say, 20 buy-ins for their new level. They're taking a 5 buy-in shot. If you tilt off another 5 buy-ins, you're left with only 10 buy-ins for your new level, 20 buy-ins at your last level, and you're kind of at a point where you may even have to move back another level if you don't recognize this soon enough. So I think discipline and making sure you stick to them 5 buy-ins is really, really important. And that if it's not going well for you, there's no shame in just moving back down, playing for a little bit longer at the level below, and then moving up when you do feel like you're ready. The last thing is, don't significantly change your game when you move up. Obviously, if you are taking a shot at the next level, you've built your bankroll up doing something right. Obviously, you know, you had to have done something right to actually build your bankroll to the point that it is. You don't need to go changing your game when you move up significantly. You know, I'm saying that it's more aggressive at the $20 level than the $10 level, or, you know, it's people are going to be thinking more when you move from the 20s to the from the 10s to the 20s. But this really shouldn't change them core concepts that we've built ourselves on, which are the focus points that we've stuck to all series. You should not change them things. You know, your adaptability may have to change as you move up, but this is going to come with experience. You don't really need to think about the little facets of the game that you're going to have to change. You just need to keep playing each villain on their merit, using your hand reading skills, your board texture reading, um, and making them observations and using that thought process that we've used throughout the series to break down our opponents and abuse their tendencies. So, you should just be following them strict rules. You don't have to change your game just because you're moving up, and because I say it's more aggressive when you move up doesn't mean that you all of a sudden have to turn into an aggro sputard, for example. It doesn't mean that you have to get more aggressive. It just means that you have to be. All I'm saying is that you should be ready for a little bit more aggression when you do move up from our opponents. Okay, so we'll move on. The next thing is, there can be a lot of frustration when you're playing heads up, sit and goes. The next two slides are really about this. You've got to be disciplined, and this is what I was just talking about on the last slide, is really sticking to our discipline and following them key strategies and them core concepts that we've worked on throughout the duration of this series. Them focus points should really be your main objective when you sit down to play a session, and doing them things right, doing the basics well, then using that thought process, so analyzing our opponent's game, breaking it down, and working out a way to abuse their tendencies. Being disciplined in everything that we do, is going to be the best approach for us, because heads up sit and goes can be heads up poker in general can be really frustrating at times. Things aren't going to go your way a large percentage of the time, so you have to maintain focus and continue to learn both about your opponents and about yourself as you start moving up through the limits. I think this is important because, if you're playing well, a lot of the time you're going to get your money in, particularly in all-in pots, with good equity. But a lot of the time things aren't going to go your way if you are constantly getting it in with the better equity. I think, when you think about it, if you get in with aces versus deuces pre-flop, for example, you're an 80% favorite, but you're still going to lose that 20% of the time. That 20% of the time, in a lot of the cases, comes back to back to back to back. It's just going to happen. You have to really try to stay focused, continue to learn, continue to develop as a poker player, and really focus on your equity, not necessarily the results. And I know you guys have probably heard it time and time again, don't be results oriented, don't be results oriented. But it's one thing, to know that in your mind, and it's another thing to actually be able to stick to that in real practice. So I think working on that and working on your own discipline is really important. The next point here is setting reasonable goals, and preferably volume-based. I think a lot of people set their goals as, I want to make $400 this month playing poker, or I want to, make $1,000 this month playing heads up sit and goes. Okay, I don't think that's the right way to necessarily go about it. I think you really should be going, I want to play 200 games this month, and I want to play my A game for them 200 games. I want to feel like I play well for them 200 games. And I know that it's hard to do, and it's easier to set money-based goals, but the best thing that you can do for your own game is to set volume-based goals and just let the money sort itself out. Because if you have an edge, long-term it's going to balance out. You just really need to focus on getting that volume in, setting reasonable volume goals for yourself, or reasonable ROI-based goals, and really stick to them rather than worrying about the money all the time. This is the last thing, and it's really, kind of blended in with the last slide with how frustrating heads up sit and goes can be at a lot of the time. Some matches, this is more in-game. Some matches are going to go for what seems like an eternity. You're going to have a villain all in several times, even 6 times in some spots, and they're just going to keep doubling through. And I think this is the most common thing that I hear from people when dealing with heads up sit and goes. Getting frustrated by is, and personally I get frustrated by it myself a lot, is that you have an opponent all in, you grind them down, you get them all in, they double. You grind them back down, they double again, so on and so forth, and it just keeps on going on and on, where you can't win an all in, even if you get, them in as a 70-30 favorite 4 times in a row. You've got to hang in there and try not to get frustrated. You just got to keep grinding them down, keep your chin up, knowing that you've crushed them in equity. That's really what's important, because losing, say, 5 matches in a row to a lot of people can start sending them on to some degree of tilt. I think having a stop loss is really important. So my personal stop loss is 4 buy-ins. If I lose 4 matches in a row, I go and take a break for a while. But this is going to happen to you a lot playing heads up sit and goes, and I think you're better off learning how to deal with it when you're still playing the $5, $10, and $20 games, and you're still in the low stakes. I think getting your head around these little variance factors can go a long way to your success later on when you start moving up into the higher stakes, and getting into good habits as well, such as sticking to a stop loss, for example. They can be really helpful and as you move up through the limits and you start busting into the mid stakes, because the variance is going to increase as your edge actually decreases. So, the edge that you can have in the low stakes is really significant. So against some opponents, you may actually realistically have a 65, 70, 75% win rate against a certain opponent because they're that bad. But as you move up through the limits, the maximum win rate that you're going to have against certain fish is actually going to be lower than that, and therefore the variance is going to be much higher. I think getting these little habits down pat when you're in the low stakes is really important, so that when you do move up, you can stick to them, you can keep your discipline, and you can play your A game more often than not. So that's what all that was about. I'm going to stop the PowerPoint now. We're going to go into a short little sweat session. I'm going to play a few $20 games, see how we go, and hopefully get a few situations where we can talk a little bit more about value betting. So I'll be back in just a moment, guys. Hey guys, so I'm back now. I've got my first game, my first $20 game up for this video, and we're just going to get right underway and we'll see how we go. We'll start off opening up. Any 2 cards is generally good to start with. 6-4 might be, that's definitely right towards the bottom of my range. But as I mentioned earlier in the series, just testing the waters, seeing how your opponent reacts early on in the match can be really important. So we took a stab here on the turn. He checked back the flop really fast. So I thought I'd just take a stab at this turn, but we're just going to check it down. We took our small stab at this pot and it failed, so we get to see what they have as well. Queen 4, okay, so a straight draw there. So, limping first button, snap folding to both our button raises. The first thing we're going to think about here is that our opponent is a weak passive opponent, particularly pre-flop, and post-flop, stationary, because when we've seen, he or she basically had 4 outs to a straight there, maybe queen outs. I don't know if he was necessarily thinking that way, but snap called the turn bet in the last hand will lead us to believe that he could be a little bit stationary, potentially. So we're just trying to get a feel right now and start to put the pieces of the puzzle together so that we can start working on our opponent's tendencies. We did get 3-bet to 4x last time we raised our button. For now, we're just going to keep an eye on that and just assume that he did it with a strong hand for now, seeing as that was the first time he did it. Okay, so limping king 9 off and snap checking down. So as you can see, this guy's making me look pretty silly, saying that it's more aggressive when you move up in stakes. But we'll just see how we go throughout the course of this session and see if we can get some matches that actually do display that a little bit better. Jack 6-0, check it away. I'm going to start raising some of his limps now. With a little bit wider range, because he did snap fold to the raise when he did do it when we had a strong hand. Here, bottom pair, weak flush draw. We're going to be in so many awkward spots on so many turns. I just don't see any point in even putting in 1 BB there. You know, our opponent hasn't shown us yet that he's capable of putting us in awkward spots. But if, for example, basically there's just a ton of turns on this board with our hand that we're going to basically hate, and we're going to have to fold anyway if we are facing another bet. So the ace-8-0 here, 3-bets this for the second time. I'm just going to mark it for now. It's not a great hand to defend with against a 3-bet. Unless your opponent shows a propensity to 3-bet a lot, in which case the value of your ace-x hands is going to go up. But just put out a little value bet here. Yeah, basically ace-8 isn't a great hand to be defending or 4-betting against this guy's 3-betting range at this point in time, particularly when it's such a big 3-bet as well. Okay, so far everything's been really straightforward. But I mean, that's the thing about heads up sit and goes to a large part, is that a lot of the spots that you're going to be put in, particularly in the low stakes, are going to be relatively straightforward, and just keeping to them simple things is going to be the most important thing to your success. So we'll raise here out of position. He snap folds again, but he, you know, is obviously limping 100% of his range. So we certainly have that in the back of our mind. And I'll be raising again here. I'm going to start working on him and see if he adjusts to this raising out of position bias. 3-bet again. So I'm not going to fold forever here if he continues to 3-bet. I mean, we really, given the way that he's played so far, we really have no reason to believe that it can't be just that he's card racking us at this point in time. But in saying that, I'm not going to put up with him constantly 3-betting me forever. And I'm going to start either flatting and taking some flops, even though his 3-bet size is large, or start 4-betting him with a wider range. Obviously, I'm going to be raising here if he limps again. And he flats for the first time. We flop pretty well. We're just going to fire a c-bet. So this is the first pot of any kind of size that we've seen. And we do know that he will call down with draws. So we're going to fire again here. A little bit bigger than I normally would here. Okay. So, you know, the flat flop raise turn line is generally pretty strong, and typically I expect to see a decent hand here a lot of the time. The problem, even, you know, and this villain's been relatively passive, but we're running 50 BBs here. We have fold equity still if he is bluffing here. Well, you know, if he's semi-bluffing here. But there's still a ton of hands that call that are actually worse. There's a lot of draws on this board. He turned 2-pair. So he did have the strong hand that we expected to see. But basically, the board was wet enough and draw heavy enough that stacking off there quite often is fine. But that line specifically, the whole flat flop, raise turn is generally strong, particularly when you're actually in position. A lot of opponents check call flop, check min raise turn, or check shove turn, and generally speaking, you're going to, that's one of the specific lines that you're going to see as you start moving up through the limits by average players is I'm taking that line as a value line. I don't see bluffs there that often from weaker players. Well, very rarely do I see it from weaker players. Basically, against some strong players, if I'm playing another reg, for example, I may use that line occasionally as a bluff. But typically, that line is going to be a strong line. I just hate folding, top pair. I hate folding any pair, actually. So, okay. So we'll start working this opponent out, and we'll see if we can actually make some inroads against this opponent. So he flats here at the big blind. This board here is really wet, but I have absolutely zero chance of improving my hand. I have zero chance of having showdown value. So I'm going to fire one c-bet here, particularly early on the match, see how he responds to it. And if he was to call there, I'm just going to shut down. So far, he also seems like he's erring on the nitty side of things. And we get them aces, and I'm not folding these, even if he does check call this flop and check raise the turn. But he check raises us on this flop. Now, this here is a great candidate for a flop to just raise here. There's no need for us to slow play and flat here because there's just so many hands which have, once again, it comes back to that last situation where there's just too many draws for me to fold my hand. Well, in this situation, there's just way too many draws that are going to get it in on this flop but hate a lot of turns that I'm just going to raise this flop and basically get it in. So now I'm just going to get it in. That doesn't fill a hell of a lot of hands. I mean, it's not the greatest card in the deck, but we're just going to get it in now. I'm going to bet a little bit less than what he actually has. No, I'm not. I'm just going to shove. I think the best value line here is to just shove. And we hold. So, rather than actually giving him an opportunity in that situation, I think that betting less in that situation on such a draw-heavy board actually gives him the option of actually not putting his whole stack in. With that hand specifically that he has, he may not have put it all in on the river if we'd bet, say, 590, and he just flattered. I think this is a situation where if he's calling a smaller bet, he's calling a bigger bet on this board after we 4-bet the flop. So I think the best way for us to maximize value in this situation is to just shove the turn. I think that was the best line. So we'll fire up another game, getting through them. Go again. I don't know if that's the same guy or not. Can't remember. I actually paid no attention whatsoever to what the last guy's name was, so this could be the same opponent. I have no way of being able to check it out because I don't have a poker tracker running. Anyway, we'll just play away. I could ask him. So ace-jack here is clearly an open. We whiff the flop, but we're going to c-bet. Even though we have showdown value here, we're just c-betting that flop early on in the match 100% of the time with our hand. Plus, we've basically got 6 cards to improve as well, even if we are called. So hopefully we can get some post-flop play into this match or the next match, so that we can start talking about extraction and value betting, particularly value betting on later streets, because I think that it's something that we haven't really got the opportunity to touch on throughout the series is value betting, across multiple streets, because, against a lot of the opponents that we do play against, we're not getting that opportunity to, because stacks are 75 BBs maximum, we don't really get the opportunity to play post-flop that often. especially against weaker opponents, who generally like to play pre-flop, or they check fold a lot. They like to play shovey, on early streets and just get their stack in whenever they hit a pair. So hopefully we get some situations where we can actually play some post-flop poker. Here, if he was to 3-bet me here, I may consider just flatting. The stacks are still relatively deep, and because our hand is suited, and we've kind of been running over him to this point. This is the first time he's 3-bet us. I'm going to show some discipline here and actually fold, even though, because folding's right here, even though I would just love to peel that hand. It gets us in too many dominated situations where he's going to have bigger aces and we're going to be crushed. So I think the best line in that situation is to just market pre-flop. Here with a flush draw on a pretty dry board, I'm just going to check raise in here. We get called. We turn a gut shot as well to go with our hand. I'm going to fire another barrel here. We get called pretty quickly, and we get there on the end. And this is a situation where bet size can be important. Now, I don't want to take too long, because the longer I take, the more chance there is that he's actually going to fold. So I think this is a situation here. We're going to talk about this a little bit more after the hand. I just wanted to get the bet out, because the longer we actually take to make the bet, the less chance it is that he actually calls. I think making a bet really quickly there has a higher success rate of just getting snap calls by top pairs, for example, than what it does if we actually tank for a little bit and then make our bet. But yeah, so he shoves on his next hand. But here, this is a board here where, we check raise this flop, we bet the turn, and the river card brings a really obvious draw. So the most obvious draw here is obviously the one that we had, which is the flush draw. Now, when a really obvious draw rolls off like this, the best bet size to go for value against an opponent who we may suggest is actually thinking about what we could have is to perhaps bet a little bit smaller here. For one, we give him the opportunity to shove. Oh God, what am I doing? For one, we actually give him the opportunity to bluff shove on us, given the stack sizes. So the stack sizes there were relatively important on the river, because he had about 870 left. Now, if we were to bet, say, 600, then he knows that we're committed to call his shove. If we bet a little bit smaller, then it's not so evident that we're committed to call his shove, and he may think that he actually has fold equity in that situation. On top of that, I think given such an obvious draw got there, a lot of the time an opponent can think, oh, I've got top pair, but he's given me such good odds, so I call. But if we overbet, for example, he just snap folds. Whoops. But yeah, anyway, that was a really terrible shove by me. I thought the blinds were actually bigger than that. But anyway, it would give us a bit longer to play against this guy. So in that situation, when a really obvious draw gets there, you actually got that obvious draw there. I think the best bet size is generally erring on the smaller side and trying to get calls out of top pair or two pair type hands, which get a little bit stubborn, and use that excuse, I've got the odds to call, even though we didn't actually get called. My shove with ace-9 was pretty terrible. I thought the blinds were up, and I thought that he actually had less BBs than he actually did. And it just happened that we run into a hand. I mean, it's not horrible shoving ace-9 suited there with stacks the way they were, because as I mentioned in our last series, we have the opportunity to take him out. And even if he doubles, we're kind of back to even stacks. But in saying that, his actual calling range there is pretty narrow, I think, this particular opponent. Okay, so hopefully we've caught up to things now. I'm going to 3-bet the ace queen off. This is a standard 3-bet. And I was calling a shove, even though it's for, 50 BBs, I'm still calling a shove. Okay, so he 3-bet shoves. That's the second time he's done that. We're not going to be stacking off to a 3-bet shove light at all. When we're this deep, we're never really going to be calling it light. There's just there's just way too many spots where we're going to have a ton of better equity than calling off such a big shove with a weak hand. So, for example, my range for calling this shove against this guy is basically going to be 9s plus in terms of pairs, sometimes 8s, but I think 9s plus, ace queen suited plus, ace king off plus, ace queen off, yeah, ace queen plus, 8s plus is a pretty good range to be calling that shove with. I don't think it's really necessary to call it off much lighter than that, considering we don't have any real read to suggest that this guy will do that light. 3-betting again. That hand was pretty close if he actually was to shove. As it is, this board here really doesn't hit much of his flatting range. He flatted us last time. He snap folded to our continuation bets when we've 3-bet every single time. But even still, this board really doesn't hit much of his range. I'm going to check shove on him here, but we hit the turn anyway, so he had the check or fold button ticked. So a c-bet would have taken down there anyway. I just think once we do it enough, we have to decide to bet call there or check shove there. And I think check shoving's the best because I think, the equity that our hand has against the range that he shoves over our c-bet there with is a lot different to the equity that he actually calls it off against a shove. And here we have 1 over, likely, some of the time we can draw to our 8 here. Sometimes we're actually up against other flush draws here. He's started to get really aggressive. And I'm going to call it off knowing that I have an edge against this guy and that I'm still going to have 1,000 chips left. Most of the time here, we have at least 13 outs, and I'm never going to pass up a 52% situation, or well, a flip situation when I can take him out here. And we miss again. So that's fine, but I'm never going to pass up a 50-50 situation when I'm still going to have over 30 BBs left, basically. So we start working on him again and start trying to get our chips back and start getting back in a situation where we can play for his chips again. So we've had 2 situations now where we've had him all in. Both, didn't work favorably for us, but nonetheless, we've had him all in twice for his tournament life. We haven't been all in yet. We have a clear edge on this guy, so it's, should only be a matter of time before we get another situation where hopefully we can get it in with a little bit better equity. So far he's basically shown us that he's really straightforward. We know that that check over shove was top pair, so that'll definitely be in the back of the mind if he does that again and fold to the 3-bet. I think firing out here isn't unreasonable, taking a stab at this pot. And actually, given Given the river card, I'm going to take another shot. I think he raises on the turn with the top pair here. And I think that he bets a queen here on this flop. Okay, so I was wrong. But I think that that's a plus EV spot to bet that river there. The king isn't the greatest card in the deck, but given that I think that he raises us there a ton when he hits the king, and that I don't really see that many queens in his range, even though I was wrong, I think it's fine to fire another barrel there at the river. Given that he's check called check folded a lot, I don't love c-betting here on such a dry board because I think he folds too often. But I don't really see anything else we can do given our dynamic that we've formed. The fact that we've c-bet every time, I think it becomes a little bit suspicious if we go checking it back there. So I think just betting for value there is probably the best way to go about it, and just going for multiple streets. So now the blinds get up, at times it becomes easier for us as the blinds get up to work him down in chips because the pots are actually slightly bigger, and particularly when he's, calling pre-flop and then just check folding a lot, it becomes easier to actually grind him down. Even though at the moment it's actually going the opposite way for us and we're still losing chips. So. But now we've got a 3-bet shove stack. 25 BBs is a 3-bet shove stack. Basically, I'm going to start shoving on him rather than 3-betting him to a normal size. And this hand's going to be one of them hands that I actually do 3-bet shove. I think his calling range is pretty narrow there for starters. And secondly, I don't actually think that, I think our hand plays relatively well against his calling range anyway. So here we get ourselves in a little bit of a pickle. We've likely got, no, I'm just going to fold. We've likely got 11 outs there most of the time, but he's got some redraws, particularly on that type of board. So I think he's showing hands like 4-5, and possibly even he can have made hands like 5-6 and ace-5, for example. So here we're going to c-bet again. Once again, as I said last time, there's no point in us slow playing given the dynamic that we've worked up. And sometimes I'll check back here, and I'll check back here just for because I think he's going to bluff a pretty high frequency on the end. But the thing is that this board's so draw heavy that I don't want to see ugly cards roll off on the river, and be stuck in situations where he overpots it at us, and we're left to call. So hopefully we can hold. We don't. So, but there's that line that I mentioned before, the check call flop check shove turn with trips there, which is typically strong. So we've certainly got a read on this guy post-flop that he check-shove top pair on a drawy board, yet he check-called and then check-shoved the turn with a really strong hand, also on a relatively drawy board. So we are certainly getting a pretty good grasp on what his shoves mean in certain spots. I'm just going to keep raising here. He hasn't really shown us that he's going to play back at us with a great enough frequency to stop us from just raising. 3-bet shoving here. Okay, so we get basically slow rolled. And we can't get lucky, so we'll see if he will take a rematch or not. But yeah, that the ace X there, I'm shoving that all the time, basically. Um, with my stack, a little bit over 20 BBs, especially when I think that I've got a ton of fold equity. Like he called us basically with queens, which is what I would consider the top of someone's range. Getting called by queens in that spot, whatever. I think we get folds there a high enough percentage of the time to just shove. So just waiting on our last game, guys, which will hopefully be, well, which will be the last game of this series. So far, we haven't really come across that many situations, post-flop situations where I can try to work on the extraction and the value betting. I might have actually been better off going through some hand histories or something like that on the replay up to best show that. But if you guys have any questions regarding that or any hands regarding that, feel free to just post them in the forum, and we can go over them together and chat about what the best lines were and why they were the best lines in certain situations in the low stakes. So we'll get underway here and start working out some thoughts on our opponent. This board here, I mean, these cards here, it's relatively wet. Yeah, relatively dry with the one big card, two little cards. Not a great card to double barrel. I'm basically just going to shut down and see if we can get our ace to showdown here. I think it's quite reasonable to expect that we have the best hand here, but I also think it's quite reasonable to expect that we only get called by better hands, so this isn't a value bet spot. Okay, so we're pretty close to having the best hand. Ace 9 suited, definitely raising. King 5-0, he limps. We flop middle pair here, and turn 2. He has no read on our bet sizing, so I'm going for maximum value. Basically, at this point in time, he didn't have any reads on our sizing. So when we do turn 2 pair there, I'm just going for absolute max value. And he called us down with King 9, so that's pretty reasonable on his behalf. He check calls this flop. It's really dry. I'm going to bet the turn here. I think a lot of things he called us with on the flop he's calling this turn with. And then I'll make a decision based on the river. The only real draw here is 3-4, but I kind of expect to get raised here. There's a fair few queens in his range given his line, but I don't really expect to see big queens in his range, so basically queen jack, king queen. I don't expect to see a lot of them in his range because without even knowing too much about this guy, I tend to think that he check raises a lot of them in general. I'm going to value bet really small here and see if we can get value out of like 5x here. So I think it's reasonable to believe that he had a draw there. But basically I'm value betting really small there because it's pretty thin in that situation because there's not a whole lot he can have that can call 3 streets that we beat, even though it is a value bet spot. Like we should be value betting there, but I think there's a decent portion of his range, like Queen 9, Queen 10, which are going to be calling there, that actually do have a speed. That's only a couple of hands, but still. Here he pots it at us. This is going to be a spot where it's really obvious if another heart rolls off. I'm going to get it in here against this guy, hopefully, with a nut flush draw here and an overcard. It's also going to give us a free look at the river here because I'm going to check back this turn. It's not a great turn card to go shoving. Plus, given his line so far, I think there's a lot of actual worse flush draws in his range. On this river, given his bet size, I think this is King X way too often to go calling a bet here. You know, a lot of people will look at this board and go, oh, he's got a busted flush draw. But without the nut flush draw, with us having the nut flush draw, I think there's not a whole great deal of busted flush draws here which take that line. So we'll just fold. There's going to be better spots for us, basically. Firing this turn here. We showed him that we had a strong hand last time we took that line. Not that our hand wasn't decently strong there, but, you know, we don't mind getting folds in that spot. Definitely c-betting this board with our ace-jack. I'm going to check back this turn. See a river card and see how he responds on the river. He had ace-x last time he did this. A whiffed ace-x. I might be value towning myself here, but I think that there's potential for him to call with worse aces. Ace-6, we'll just check it away. And fold to his c-bet. This is the first time he c-bet, so we'll just muck it. Jack 10 opening here on the button. And once again, it's a pretty decent board texture, plus we've got a gut shot here to just go ahead and c-bet. He called our second barrel last time, we double barreled. We have a hand which can certainly improve on the end. And I'm just going to fold when he leads out here. I think taking the free card on the, given that turns, actually terrible to double barrel on this board once he check calls that flop. I think taking the free card there is the best line to actually take. Eights are obviously an open, and on this drawy board we are just betting. That's a pretty good turn. I'm going to take my time because I took my time last time. I double barreled, and I have taken my time on the turn, in all spots. But I think that there's enough hands that we actually get value out of here. There's just so many draws that I think we have to A, protect our hand, and B, we have to charge draws as well. I'm going to shove this river, and the reason is basically I think that if he did have Jack X, he's calling here, and his excuse will be, oh, this guy's got a busted draw, and I think he's not calling any bet with his busted draws anyway, so I think that the best line there is to just shove that river because, if we're getting called, we're getting called, and if he's folding, he's folding basically. So that's a really kind of straightforward situation where just betting the maximum is when we've set up basically a situation where we can shove less than pot there on the river. I think is the best situation. And in some cases, it's best there to, if you do have more than the pot, it's a really good situation to actually overbet shove. If, say, we had 900 and the pot was 500 there on the river, that's the type of situation where it's a really good spot to overbet shove for value, because an opponent is calling with, as I said, he's calling if he's calling and he's folding if he's folding, basically, regardless of your actions. Particularly, an overbet may lean them towards calling with a Jack X type hand, because they use that excuse that you have a busted draw. I'm going to fold middle pair here. Last time he did it, it seemed like it was a strong hand. This time, I'm just going to fold my middle pair there. Raising out of position here. This is the second time we've done this to him. The first time we had 10, so it's not like we're doing it crazily. Queen 9's a raise, and this is a... Even though he's flattered all of our c-bets, I'm still going to c-bet this board. And once again, we're going to take a free river card because we pick up a draw here on the turn. I think that we legitimately have more outs this time to improve where we can call a river bet. But he uses this line again. So now that he has shown us this line, I think that there's a chance that we can use that line for value. With our strong hands, that is c-bet, considering he check calls every flop, check back the turn and raise the river. I think it's a legitimately good line to take against players who show you that they're willing to take that line. Checking back here, King High can be considered a showdown value. This board is really drawy. There's just a ton of hands which is continuing with. He pots the turn. I'll keep that in mind as well, because there are some players who, if you check back the flop, they will just insta pot the turn into you. That's not a half bad flop. But yeah, they'll insta pot the turn into you if you check back the flop. Here's a case where I don't really see what hands he can have, so I'm going to check raise him here, because if he had a flush, you know, some people will call me crazy for checking in that spot, but I don't really see any hands in his range which can call a bet. Yet, sorry, we just flopped a flush there. I probably should have checked that flush back, but oh well, because it was a strong flush as well. But yeah, this is a situation on the river here where he can't call a bet with, you know, 90% of his range. He just can't call a bet. Yet we're allowing him to bluff by checking the river to him. And on top of that, if he does have a strong made hand that he bets here on the river, he's going to have a hard time folding to a raise here anyway. So, for example, if he has Jack-9 or if he made a flush there on the end, he's going to have a really hard time folding. But the hands which actually call when we lead into him there on the river, after checking the flop and betting the turn there, I don't think we get called by much. I hope that made sense, because I was waffling a little bit there. Okay, so he does this again. This is the last time. Basically, if he continues this whole leading full pot at me, I'm going to just start raising him, because I hate when people do it, and I hate folding pairs. That's a really bad example, but I shouldn't say that on video. But, you know, if he's going to up the aggression and think that he can start running me over, then basically I'm going to start playing back at him a ton. And he does it again, and this time we have a legitimate hand to raise him with. And shoving the turn. Whoops. Okay, so he runs really good. We run really good. So, you know, I think that shows us that his full pot leads were legitimately strong hands and that he was likely card racking us. Our original read on it was basically that it was strong hands. So, I mean, I'm never folding aces. Sorry, that's what I said before. I just don't fold pairs. That's because I'm a heads up sit and go pro, and we don't like to fold pairs playing heads up sit and goes because we're loose crazy maniacs. No, I'm messing around. Anyway, guys, I hope you guys have enjoyed the series. I hope you've learned something throughout the series. As always, if you have any questions, any feedback, please post them in the forum. Chris has done a great job with the forum and cleaning it up so that you can actually post them while you're watching the videos and stuff. So feel free to go ahead and post. As for what's next, I'm not 100% sure at this stage. If you have any suggestions or whatever, also just drop that in the forum or hit me with a PM or something like that. Once again, hope you've enjoyed the series. This is MJW006 signing out for part 3 of low stakes heads up sit and goes. Good luck in all of your game, guys. Peace.